right. Do you want me to start? Yes. All right. Can you hear me well? And online as well? Perfect. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Caroline Bailon. I'm one of the Pro-Vice Chancellors here at the University of Reading, and it's my pleasure to introduce this lecture. I'm really delighted to be here today to introduce Professor Stella Chan, who will be talking to us about young people's mental health. Navigating the complexities of the teen and young adult years has never been easy. We're living through historically unstable times, and the pressures on young people are only increasing. I'm sure we can all recall periods of time in our youth when we struggled. But be that through our exam, day-to-day life, family issues, friends, but also social pressures, different trauma. So before anything else, we should acknowledge that this can be a very sensitive topic and that can be triggering for some people. If anyone here needs to step out at any point, feel free to do so and just do what you need to do. We're fortunate today to welcome a researcher who's dedicated her career to understanding the biological and psychological risk factors that impact a young person's mental health. Stella is an academic clinical psychologist with a doctorate in experimental psychology from the University of Oxford. She's followed by a second professional doctorate that qualified her as a clinician. She joined the university in 2020 as the Charlie Waller Professor, serving as the research lead of the Charlie Waller Institute, which was set up with the support of the Charlie Waller Trust, our sister organization. She's also the research lead of our Anxiety and Depression in Young People Clinic, a unique university-led research active clinic. Outside the university, she holds prestigious roles. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the British Psychological Society, and an expert advisor to the Flanders Research Foundation in Belgium. Psychological Society's Public Engagement and Media Award, as well as serving as an expert advisor to national and international bodies. So in good hands. Stella focuses her work on adolescent depression, anxiety, and well-being, bridging between scientific research and clinical practice. Her research group is one of the pioneers in adapting citizen science methodology in the field of mental health. Since joining Reading, she's co-founded the Reading Resilience Network with Berkshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. Tonight, she will share some of that work with us. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Stella Chan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Caroline. Am I okay? Yeah, okay. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and welcome to you all, and welcome to the baby at the back. Is that okay? No. Is that better? Yes. Okay. I'm so excited to be here today because I like talking to people and sharing our work and talk to anyone who would listen. And I joined the university during COVID time, so it wasn't possible. So it had been a long wait. So I just want to start by telling you a little bit about myself. So I was thinking that I can't spend too much time about myself, so I just need to put all my life into one single slide. So it's divided into 4 different decades of my life, starting from 1980s when I literally grew up in a fire station. My father was a fireman. And actually, you'll be surprised by how much I learned about resilience, mental health in that setting. But I will leave it for another talk. But just to say thank you to my parents who have inspired me so much throughout the years. And fast forward to 2000, when I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to come here to Britain to receive higher education and master and onwards. So it was through those years that kind of, again, left a lot of inspiration with me. Then after a lot of different things, fast forward to 2010s when I moved up to Scotland, where I spent 8 happy years with the Highland cows and other things during the day. And it is actually during 2020 that I came back here to the Thames Valley, relocated here with my husband and 2 young children. And you can see that they're here, they're watching online, but I tell them that they can start their bedtime and activities after this slide. So I just say good night to them. And on that note, I want to welcome all the online audience as well, because there's quite a lot of them there. And the reason why we're here today is that I think all of you are concerned about the latest development that we all know that 1 in 5 young people in England now probably have a mental health disorder. And this is the kind of figures that really worry us. We know that there is a trend of increasing mental health difficulties in young people as well. And in England alone, we know that 25 of people will experience at least 1 mental health illness in their lifetime. Keep skipping. And depression affects 300 million people globally. When I was doing my PhD, almost 20 years ago, it was predicted that depression will become the top cause of disability worldwide, and now that has happened already. And we know that also, not that a lot, only that a lot of people are struggling with the mental health difficulties in different age groups, but 75% of the mental health illness actually begins before the age of 18. That is very young. So it's not necessarily mean that they get a diagnosis early on, but when they look back in their life, they know that their difficulties actually started early on in the teenage years. Although we also know that on average, it takes about 10 years for young people to seek help or to access help. So that, again, that gap is also an important gap that we need to address. And out of all the mental health difficulties, we know that depression and anxiety are among the most common mental health difficulties. One of the common questions I'm being asked is, what is the difference between depression and anxiety? Because it sounds obvious, but actually, often people have a bit of both. But actually, they're quite different things, but sometimes we get a bit of both, and it's a bit confusing. The way I normally explain to people is that depression is like a rubber band, and then you sort of lose the elasticity. So it's a sense of kind of withdrawal, and you lose interest in things you normally enjoy. Whereas anxiety is kind of like the rubber band being really tight. So you kind of got more anxious and worry about things. It's a kind of a very different kind of feelings. But if you're kind of feeling anxious a lot of time, you probably will feel low as well, because that is actually a very negative feeling, and vice versa. So depression and anxiety often co-occur. And sadly, we know that suicide is the leading cause of mortality among young people. And also we know that mental health problems are particularly common among certain types of young people, certain groups or communities, due to some of the diversity, such as neurodiversity, or the LGBT plus community, ethnic minority, refugee groups, those in care, those in justice system, and people from lower income household, and some other characteristics as well. So these are also often the group that are kind of, they missed out on research, and so it's not a lot of research on people who are so-called kind of out of the mainstream. But actually, there are a lot of people out of mainstream, because nowadays, we celebrate diversity, but the research needs to catch up. We also know that only 26%, like just about a quarter of the mental health research focuses on young people, despite this being such an important issue. Now, another striking thing is that it's not only about the number of people, it's not just the scale of the problem, but it's also about the perspective and the views and how does having a mental health problem make you feel. And in a large-scale survey, we know that half of the young people think that if they have a mental illness diagnosis, it probably means that they will never get better. And more than half of them think that, people will treat them differently and they will feel embarrassed and ashamed of themselves. Now, these look like a lot of worries, but the question is there actually some truth in it? If you look at that, if you look at the data, are the current treatment actually effective? The good news is that, if you pull together a lot of what we call meta-analysis, meaning that we take all the data across many, many studies and reanalyze the data, so that is the kind of gold standard of evidence-based practice because you've got all the data available. If you look at that, the headline, the good news is that having some treatment is better than no treatment. But if you look at the details, even with treatment, only 36% of the people, that is just over 1/3 of people with anxiety, achieve remission. That means that only about 1/3 of the people, young people who receive treatment for anxiety, reach a point that we can consider as full recovery. And similarly, for depression, out of 40 studies, we know that 60% of the individuals do not respond to the treatment. So having some treatment is still better than none, but actually overall, it's still very, very low response rate there. And also, more worryingly, we know that in the past 13 years, there has been no significant progress. The treatment effectiveness has remained pretty much the same and unchanged, especially for depression. And another thing that I think we really need to think about is that it's not only about clinical outcome. It's not just a clinical problem we're talking about, but it's a social problem as well. Because just now we heard about how young people feel about having a mental health diagnosis. And we also know from really recent reports that over 1/3 of young people experience stigma and discrimination when seeking mental health support. So it's not only about internalized worries, but it's actually there's some truth around the way society is built and the way we see each other and the way we support each other. And our own research of analyzing 10 months of online forum amongst young people also show a lot of public hostility and what we call internalized stigma. So stigma is about you feel that, you worry that other people will think badly of you. But when that kind of negative feeling and thoughts got internalized and you started doubting yourself and believing it, this kind of internalized stigma is actually just as harmful. So this is come from some of our own research as well. So what we really need to do is the reason partly why we were launching all this kind of Reading Resilience Network and other initiatives that Caroline mentioned in the introduction and some of those that I will talk about later, is because what we really need to think about is that traditionally we think about starting from theory and research, and then we design some intervention, and then we apply in real life. So that sounds all very logical, but actually, ideally, we can even do it smarter than that. We can move away from the linear direction into a more interactive approach, thinking about how theory and research will impact on the way we design intervention, and then will impact on the real-life application. But at the same time, draw upon the knowledge from people who are in the front line, either offering services or receiving services with lived experiences. If everyone worked together, that can feed it right back into theory and research and intervention design. So the three actually can go together and as an interactive cycle. And the key really is to enlarge this overlapping space, making better use of our working together and partnership working. And this is what our team and many of our colleagues are trying to achieve here and aspiring to at Reading. So today I bring with me 3 examples of our work, and I only have time to give a kind of overview of each of them, but hopefully we'll have time to ask more questions, discuss it more further on that. So starting from part 1 is the risk and resilience factors. It comes from one of our 5-year longitudinal study, which we are recently concluding our findings after 5 years of data collection. So altogether, we have made a large assessment over 425 secondary school age children from 12 to 18 years old across 12 schools. Some of them are state funded, some of them are independent schools. So it's a very wide range of in terms of household income, demographics, and so. So from the very, very basic, we want to look at the demographic data. Would there be any age and gender differences in particular amongst these young people? And what we've found is that there is very striking gender differences there. So if you look across the age group, from 12 years old to 17, so covering the secondary school years mostly. So you start off with here, and then gradually increase in the girls. This is the line for the adolescent girls. It kind of gradually go up and peak around age 15. For the boys, you can see that it have a very similar trend of increase, but overall, girls is constantly above boys here. This is the kind of gender gap that we see across the lifespan. It doesn't finish in teenage years. It carry on like this. And this comes from our data of this study, but we were not the first to demonstrate it. This is actually quite robust pattern that we've been seeing in research. Similar, if you look at anxiety, very similar trend, that girls are always having higher scores there than boys, and then it kind of start from 12, going up gradually and peaking around age 15. So these age and gender differences are important when we consider intervention later on. And later on, when you look at some of our later projects, you can see why we're targeting certain age group. And this is where it comes in. And if you look at well-being, so well-being is a very important thing to consider. Traditionally, when we do mental health research, we think about symptoms like depression, anxiety. But the World Health Organization has advocated that we should always look at well-being as a separate outcome variable, because well-being is not always just the flip side of symptoms. If you look at depression anxiety scale, if you don't have a lot of symptoms, you're kind of doing quite well in life, the best you can get is 0 as a score. So after you get 0, you can't really differentiate anybody within that. But however, in our life, it's more than just not having symptoms. It's actually a big range in terms of our quality of life. And that is why World Health Organization has encouraged all research to include well-being as a separate outcome. And that's what we did. If you look at that, actually, the difference is not very big, but similarly, the girls are lower well-being, kind of dropping here, but lower than boys. Right from the start, I said that we have actually assessed a lot of variables, because we also need to move away from just counting symptoms, because the crucial question here is not just about whether our young people are doing well or not. It's about what is driving what is causing them difficulties, and what is keeping some of them more relatively resilient over the years, and why some of them are more at risk. So we have a very big assessment protocol, ranging from biological lifestyle. We look at the sleep, for example. So the young people have to wear the actigraph, which is a kind of little wristwatch to sleep for a night, for us to record the actual sleep quality. It's very interesting because they record things like whether you wake up or not. And sometimes if you look at the self-report, people can wake up without themselves knowing, or they think that they haven't slept, but actually they have slept. So it's actually tell you quite different things there. Cortisol, another interesting variable, because traditionally, you need to do blood test or saliva. And in our study, we use a more modern way of looking at that. And you can actually look at the cortisol level in the hair. So the longer hair you have, the more data you have, because you can go back further in time. So that we have much less data from the boys because they have shorter hair. So if you have really long hair, keep them. They really can help us understand how much stress you're undergoing in life. I really like this kind of incorporating a mixture of subjective measures and some of these more objective measures, because it tells a lot more about how a person is functioning in everyday life. We look at the physical activity level, a variable that come back later in our later studies, smoking, alcohol, food habits, what you eat, eating attitudes, etc. We look at the social interpersonal side, not only the social groups, friendship group, but also parental support. And increasingly, we look at the social media engagement, social media use, bullying and cyberbullying. External shame, so I just want to explain a little bit. So shame can be internal or external. So internal is how you feel about yourself. So you feel ashamed of yourself. So that is a very subjective internal feeling. External shame actually is still a subjective feeling, but it's more about what you think other people think of you. So it's a bit of social comparison there. Young people can be very sensitive about that. Bullying, and that's a traditional bullying and more kind of cyberbullying that's related to kind of social media use. Demographic, I already talked about that. Neuroticism is a personality. I always reassure people that if you score high on neuroticism, please don't be alarmed, because I score very high on that and I'm functioning okay. It's a personality. It doesn't mean that you are mentally ill or anything like that, but it's just a bit of a temperament that may increase your risk, that if you're more likely to worry about things on an everyday life sort of thing. So that's kind of quite a well-established risk factor. Family history of mental health problem, personal history of mental health problem. Cognitive is about the way you think, your thinking style, and psychological. So about rumination is a thinking style, you think about things over and over again. Dysfunctional attitudes is about things like perfectionism, unrealistic expectations, neurocognitive biases. That is really interesting, because the way you measure that in some kind of computer task, almost like a computer game, is that often you see subtle differences in the way people attention, memory, interpretation. Sometimes you see that in the level of their reaction time. If you ask them, how do you interpret situation, they may not spontaneously be able to show the negative biases, because people can adapt quite well. But if you look at how quickly they respond to information, positive information, negative information, you can see subtle differences in terms of reaction time, things like that. So that is something that we make use of quite a lot of different kind of measurement. Resilience, about how you bounce back from setback and disappointment. Stress is actually quite intuitive. So I just want to mention the timeline that we did a very big assessment right from the start at baseline. Then we did a short follow-up, 6 months, and the long follow-up, which is 60 months. In between was COVID, and that's a school-based study, so there were times that we couldn't go into the school. But actually the good news is that because we couldn't go into school, so we extended project to allow us to see a longer-term difference, how the young people grow up, and so. So here is a kind of summary of our finding. What you see here is that this, just look at the first one. Okay, so that is a predictive model of depression. Now, if you look at depressive symptom, we want to see what predict depression. We know that almost 70%, so 69%, so it's quite high, it's more than 2/3, of the depressive symptoms can be predicted by 7 factors. So that is come with pre-existing low mood. So people already to start with have more low mood, then it go on to have more low mood. Eating disorder risk. A lot of people think eating disorder is an eating problem, but actually it's an emotional problem just as much, because it's very much driven by an emotional difficulty. Stress, external shame, rumination, that thinking pattern, negative thinking pattern, negative biases about themselves, and lack of physical activity. Now, all this actually, this is quite an elegant model in the sense that, over 2/3 of the depressive symptom can be predicted by 7 factors, which is actually quite good model to understand it. But more striking is if you look at the predictive model of anxiety, more than half of that can be predicted by just 3 factors. Okay, it's a lot less factors than here. So again, neuroticism, eating disorder risk, and stress. So there's something in common here, but overall it's only 3. But if you look at well-being, 60% can be explained by just 2 factors. Okay, so this is actually quite interesting from a scientific point of view and very informative and very useful for us in terms of thinking around intervention development, because if you look at research literature and research study individually on depression or on anxiety, on well-being, then individually all sounds very logical. But it's only when you put them all together into a single model here that make you realize one of the important things is about this 7 factors versus 3 versus 2. So the clinical implications here is that, first of all, for intervention development, we really need to think about what is the underlying mechanism, what is the predicting factor, what is driving it. Because if we simply think about how to help young people to relieve the temporary low mood or anxiety feeling, that is good in the short term, but in the long term, it doesn't necessarily help to prevent more depression and anxiety in the future. So we need to address the underlying risk mechanisms. And the second clinical implication is that it looks like if we want to boost well-being or reduce anxiety, because the number of factors is not that many, we can actually consider only focusing on a few factors. Whereas if you look at depression, the number of factors is actually 7 risk factors there. So the intervention needs to consider more factors and is much more complex here. That actually quite resonate with our everyday sort of clinical observations when working with people with anxiety and depression. And depression often is really more complex in the sense that if you have 2 people with depression, often they have very different experience. So it's actually quite complex models here. So in part 2, I want to talk about some innovations we have using citizen science co-production method. So particularly about Project Soothe. When you walk into the lecture hall just now, if you were early, you'll probably see some of the pictures, some of the photographs that we were kind of putting on the slideshow to show you. And outside in the foyer as well, you've seen some of the postcards. So we have some of the postcards there for you to take home if you want to take some and send it to your friends and family. Please feel free to. I just want to acknowledge that a lot of kind of organizations, funding bodies have supported the work throughout the years. We're about to celebrate 10 years anniversary next week for the project. So just want to thank all the funders and participants of the project. And you can find almost everything from our website. And everything I cover here today, all the resources I mentioned, most of them are freely available for general public. So please do come to our website, and anything useful to you, helpful for you, please use them. So first of all, let's think about what is the theory underlying it. Project Soothe was inspired by compassion-focused therapy. So compassion-focused therapy belonged to what we call the 3rd wave therapy. And don't ask me what is the 2nd wave, because no one seems to have mentioned 2nd wave. The first wave was kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's very much thinking about your thinking style and to notice some negative thinking loop and then trying to change some of those unhelpful thinking. But 3rd wave therapy is more about how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our feeling. So it's a kind of more directly addressing the more emotional level, if you like. Now, in compassion-focused therapy, the key theory underlying it is this three kind of affective system, three emotional system, starting with drive. So it's a sort of very upbeat feeling. Yay, I feel on top of the world. The kind of feeling you have if you have passed an exam or won an award, won a lottery. So it's really a good feeling. It's kind of make you feel excited, driven. But if you have it all the time, it can be quite tiring. And it's very difficult to sustain, drive all the time. The second one is a threat. So threat is the sort of things that is quite innate in us as human being and as in the animal kingdom. Because if you feel under threat, you'll be kind of more ready to run away from danger. So actually, it can be quite good. But if you're too much threat, you could feel anxious and angry a lot of times. So that's not a very good feeling. The third one is soothe. Is feeling okay, not on top of the world, but feel contented, feel content, safe and connected. So the underlying theory here is that a good balanced mental health requires us to have a good balance between the three, and often soothe is the system that is underactivated or underdeveloped in some of us, and that making it more difficult to balance it. So in compassion-focused therapy, most of the work is to work on the soothe system, is to think about how we can support people to develop or activate the soothe system more effectively, such as writing letters and so. And one of our studies right from the start is that we know this one is come from a theory, but the first thing we wanted to know is that what does it look like in everyday life? What is the everyday experience? So we have interviewed 176 participants to see what soothe means to them and how do they soothe themselves in everyday life. So these are the key themes that come out from our qualitative thematic analysis. So first of all, people understanding is that they feel interconnected state of feeling calm, relaxed, at ease, and constituted by feeling of inner peace, safeness, and contentment. So that's very similar to what the theoretical prediction was. At the same time, people mention that it's very much linked in with physical sensations about the senses, the sight, the hearing. Sometimes people mention touch as well, and smell. And nature connectedness. Nature connectedness is really interesting. When you ask people, what does soothe mean to you? No one mentioned nature. But when you ask them to think about the last time when you feel soothed, can you describe where you were, what you were doing, how did you feel? Almost without fail, most of the people mention some kind of nature connectedness. And this leads to actually one of our latest study, which I won't talk about today, is that one of our new projects starting is about nature-based intervention. Actually, so nature is really important. And both solitude and social affiliation turn out to be important. Now that looks a little bit contradictory, but actually it's not. What it means is that people feel that sometimes feel soothed. They feel soothed if they spend some quiet time by themselves, me time. But at the same time, have a sense of social affiliation, knowing that if they want to connect with someone, there's someone there to connect. So it's different from loneliness. During COVID, often I got quite a lot of requests from journalists to ask about, how bad is it to be, have this lockdown and so. The message I remember always that my answer is that being alone is different from feeling lonely. So it's actually helping people to connect each other with or without a physical connection or real life connection is important. So this comes from one of our first studies. And coming back to compassion-focused therapy and some other third-wave therapies in particular, and actually to a certain extent with CBT as well, there's an increasing use of mental imagery. So mental imagery means that you ask people, you support people to close your eyes or imagine certain things that will make you calm down more easily. So it's very much relying on people to be able to create that mental imagery in their head. Now, from clinical observation and from research, we know that some people couldn't. It could be because they're not interested in it, that's not their style or thinking. But sometimes there are situations in which it's not safe for certain people to do that. Especially people who have a traumatic background. Sometimes when you ask them to create some mental imagery, it may lead them to a darker place. So one of the things I was thinking is that I thought I'd seek some inspiration from my own personal inspiration. And this is my father. I started as a young man, very, very keen on photography. He made a dark room out of the wardrobe. So he changed the wardrobe into a dark room when he was a young man, before I was born. And I was thinking to bring his camera today, but I thought, no, it's too anxiety-provoking. If I break it, then, then I'm not going to be able to concentrate. And he was a young man, and 60 years later, he's still holding the same camera. So sadly, he passed away recently, and that was a photo taken just a few months before he passed away, and he left the camera to me in his will. It really mattered to me, this camera, because what the inspiration here for me is that actually, if it's something that is your passion, is your hobby, it's so much easier to stick to it. So if you can turn your hobby into a coping mechanism, so much the better. So I know when I talk about intervention, a lot of people think about clinical treatment, thinking something that belongs to the clinic. But actually, mental health problem, mental health experience is an everyday life experience. We all have good days and bad days. And it's about finding us, for each of us, what works for us, and to develop that strength and resilience. And for us as researchers and scientists to evaluate and find out more about that, and to help build and evaluate the evidence and fine-tune that, yes. But we mustn't be too dismissive about everyday hobby, such as camera and photograph. So this remains to me is to think about actually making use and building on people's own strength and hobbies and interest. Because if you think about data, if you look at intervention successful rate, early on I told you that it's not very good, the treatment. It's not only about the quality of the treatment, but it's also about getting people to engage in it in the long term. It's very difficult to imagine yourself, to think of yourself as a patient going into a therapy for the rest of your life. No one wants to do that. But if you say, look, it looks like reading is something that helps you to calm down, taking photographs help you, let's think about how to build that around you and how to help you to use more of that when you need it. So what we have done, we started with this project almost 10 years ago, and we started with a very simple website to say, please submit soothing photograph to us. In the introduction, Caroline mentioned that we were one of the first teams to pilot this citizen science model in mental health. What it means to be citizen science model is that we engage with the general public in every stage of our research, which is really important. I always explain to people, we as researchers can be really dull. So if we have to build our own collection of soothing photographs, it will only reflect my own preferences. You'll probably end up having the same photograph 800 times. But by engaging with general public, you get the kind of materials that really resonate with everyday life experience. So instead of we building that collection, we ask the public, can you help us build that collection? So over the years, we got more than 800 photographs submitted and voted and rated by the general public from 40 countries. I always say that we touch on every continent except Antarctica. And that is something I'm really, really proud of, is that sense of engagement and public imagination we got. And in our study, so, I put some of the references here, but what I'm actually illustrating here is that these are the top 5 themes. It's very often around landscape, water features, flowers and trees, animals and sky. So these actually also resonate with that sense of nature connection here, the senses. And more recently, this is one of our latest paper accepted just before Christmas, is that we look into what the narratives around that, what make a photograph soothing and not soothing. And what we found is that it's both in terms of the actual content of the photograph, the theme, the quality, but also about the underlying psychological processes. So some photos just bring out more soothing memories, for example. Some tap into some other senses. You make you feel that you can hear, for example, here you can hear the sound of the water, or you can feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. So these come out a lot in people's narrative. So these were rated as the most soothing one, like that, and this one. And just a wave of a hand, who find this photograph soothing? Who find it not soothing? This often divides people because, to me it's quite soothing. A big sky, I like swimming, I always find it very soothing. But some people look at these two people and they worry that, what if they drowned, There's only two of them, a very big sea, they're quite far away from that. So it depends on how you see it. But one of the learning points, I think, for intervention development is that we should make use of the overall typical responses, the mainstream responses, so to speak, but we should never forget that there are always individual differences to accommodate and to adapt your intervention around. And this is one of our studies, one of our first evaluation study as well. So first of all here, we ask people to rate whether these photographs are soothing or excited or anxious. So don't worry about the shape and size of it. So the midpoint is around here. So most people find it soothing and not excited and not anxious. That is good because that actually is resonate with what we theoretically predict this photograph to be. So they're not just positive photographs, they're photographs that make you feel soothed rather than excited or other positive feeling. And the second of all, what we wanted to know is, by looking at this photograph, we asked people to look at about 25 photographs, just randomly selected. How would the mood change, if any? So what we found is that from before to after, looking back, it's not a very big difference, but it's actually a significant difference in terms of statistical significance, meaning that you cannot explain it by chance. So there is a genuine change. From before to after, these are the positive feeling, and the negative feeling come down. That was our first evaluation. But since then, we have replicated in 5 other studies in different populations across different age groups, autistic individuals, and we have also translated some of the materials and looked at university students, including a translated version in the Chinese university students. And we found that overall, we see actually more mood improvement in people who have more mood symptoms. That is really positive news because from previous research, we know that sometimes when people have depression in particular, they may be less sensitive and less responsive to positive information. But in our study, we found that the photograph actually worked well for them, worked better for them, if anything. So they are actually quite responsive to the stimuli and the photographs. And we found that actually adding music or literary quote didn't seem to boost the benefit, but there is some early evidence from our study, from our data, that mindful breathing may be a good pairing with it. And at the moment, we're focusing on doing more research to look at the more longer-term effect. So we find it very promising, encouraging, but we mustn't forget that we're just talking about an instant change, so from before to after. So for it to be useful in an intervention, we want to be able to develop it in a way that can see a more sustainable change. And over years, we had the kind of opportunity and to work with a lot of organizations to adapt it and test it out in different settings, such as the British Library and the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. We did an exhibition there. We changed some of our photographs into computer games to engage with children. We worked very closely with Edinburgh International Book Festival over the years. This is the kind of group of charity organization work with us, and we co-produce a user guide. This is freely downloadable from the website as well, which collated all the case study from this group. And we also have an app feature in this app called CogniCare. This is an app for dementia support, but we added this feature of Project Soothe during COVID lockdown to support family who are looking after someone with dementia. Although the app itself for dementia care, but the app feature is actually quite universal. So if people are curious, please feel free to download the app and have a look at the app feature. And I particularly want to highlight this community project, which we have just completed last year. So in this one, in this latest study, we engaged with 200 children and young people. We gave them a series of 4 workshops, starting from basic mental health knowledge to Project Soothe, and more importantly, critical thinking. Because it's really important that when we do mental health promotion, not just saying that, oh, these are the things good for you, do it, because it may or may not be good for an individual. So we want to equip them with critical thinking. So we give them a workshop on that. Now, after that stage 1, so they are 10 to 21 years old, we started off with primary, secondary school, but later on extended in forensic setting and some other support services as well. So together we cover a wide range of needs and strengths. This was stage 1 of the project. But in stage 2 of the project, 70 young people and children had opted to group themselves into small groups. And each of the group, they come up with their own team name, have their own logo. So if you have arrived early and look at some of our display in the foyer area, you see some of their products actually. So this school, for example, this team, they come up with this idea to set up this little booth using sort of iPad and tents, and they set up a series of that in their school ground so that their peers can go into that during lunchtime or break time to look at soothing photograph to soothe themselves. And this is one of the comic book that we are on display, and this is a pencil case. So these were their design of well-being tools. And behind that, actually, there's a lot of rationale, a lot of thought they put into it. And together, we have published another user guide, which is, again, you can download it from our website. And another group, young people, have done, have mixed 6 videos pairing with music and so. So these are some of the projects, and we've supported them to evaluate that in their setting as well. Now, more recently, we now kind of developing more intervention and scaling up our work. We use the train the trainers model, meaning that we help, say, for example, teachers and so, train them so that they can go back to their setting to help to develop their intervention. So we have already trained 20 nurture assistants who are kind of in the schools around Wokingham School. We have trained trauma-informed artists and support children from refugee background in Wokingham area. And also 20 teachers and 100 young ambassadors in Hong Kong, over 10 schools as well. So these works are ongoing at the moment. So part 3 is just to kind of the final part of the talk today, is to bringing you yet to another project, again, that you have seen some of the outputs on display in the foyer area. As I say that, I really personally think that it's so important for us to develop the kind of health promotion and intervention that can be integrated in everyday life. And just now, photograph is something that, because I find personally, I was personally inspired growing up with a camera and a father who loved camera and all things photograph and so. But actually, photograph only one thing, and not all of us like photographs. So there are other areas we need to work into as well. And that actually come in to our latest project. And welcome to Resilience Rucksack Project. I just want to give a big shout out to my team, Aggie there and Megan there, and some of the team members who can't come here today, and school teachers who have been supporting project both here online as well joining us today. Thank you very much. Without all your help, we wouldn't be able to do the project. Also our also our sister organization, Charlie Waller Trust, and also other charity organizations like the Jasmine Foundation and Janice team, for the fundraising activities and effort that make it possible. Now, But this is another thing that, like looking back, one of the reasons why I become a psychologist is that during my teenage times, there was time when I just really struggled with my mood and feeling. And one of the time was the transition from primary to secondary school. I somehow got into this way of thinking when I was in the final year of primary school. I sort of imagined that secondary school would be so scary. And I got really, really frightened going there. And then the second stage of a challenge was the A-level time, because that is another big transition time. So transition is very important, not only from personal experience, from research as well. So from a lot of research, we know that that has been identified as a critical time, because everything's changing. It also coincides with biological changes around puberty and the social environment. So we know that we need to do some prevention. We want to be early because, right from the start in the first study, you see that in the first study I've shown you the data of how it increased, from 8 to 12. But actually, if you are looking at that kind of trend, you want to support them before that, because if you're in the middle of feeling depressed or anxious, it's very difficult to learn new skills when you're anxious and when you're feeling low. You want to equip them with the skills before that kind of challenging time hit them. So we want to be early, want to be universal in the sense that we want to cater for a lot of people. We want it to be quite easy, especially for the age group. And we want to make use of the bigger environment of the school in particular, rather than, traditionally we think about, mental health problem, individual problem. It put a lot of pressure on us as an individual, while actually it's so much about the environment that we can help and intervene. And we need to be evidence-based. So I seek inspiration. Early on I sought inspiration from my father. And now I seek inspiration from my daughter. And that's my older daughter now, 6 years old, watching online. And that was when she was a baby. She was born in Scotland. And in Scotland, every child born, you will receive a very big baby box. Big enough for the baby to sleep in, with a mattress. And with all sorts of goodies from poems, music, health, promotion, everything all included there. And even now we still have that box at home. So my inspiration is that, it is one transition moment when you have a new baby, yes, but another transitional moment is from primary to secondary school. How can we better support young people? If I give them a box, they would not use it. And what would they use for a big box? But if I give them a rucksack, they may. And also I choose rucksack because they rhyme with resilience as well. And we also choose resilience as a focus because it's about helping people to build skills, not just about dealing with difficulties. We can all do with a bit more resilience, whether you have mental health problem or not. So make it more accessible, less stigmatized. So this project, involved different stages. And in the first stage, we always start with literature review, always start with the research literature to look at what research has told us about risk and resilience factors. So we produce a very long list of factors that we know from research that may make a difference. Now, but just because something that from research we know is useful, it doesn't mean that it's easy and intuitive enough for young people to do in everyday life. So in stage 2, we convened a steering group with representatives from young people, teachers, practitioners, council members, educational sectors, etc. And then we also follow up with a survey with 200 children, young people, and asked them to look at these long lists of factors and help us to shortlist, to vote for the ones that they think are most useful and relevant for their everyday life. And then we ran 19 workshops with young people and professional artists to co-produce 8 well-being tools. And more recently, we've run 30 resilience fairs in 8 schools to pilot them. And representatives from some of the schools are here today, in person and online. Now, I've been talking quite a lot, and it's towards, we're getting towards the end. I thought I'll show you a video to give you a flavor of what it looked like.
Students at this school are taking part in a special workshop which provides young people with tools to help them look after their mental health and well-being, both in and outside the classroom. They're given these rucksacks, thank you, with items targeting 4 key areas: sleep, movement, friendships, and self-compassion.
A kind message to peers, so young people like yourself to encourage them, make them feel supported and uplift them.
I wrote, I love being your friend.
And why did you write that?
That first day, it was like, I was in the corner because I didn't know anyone. And then I saw this, one of my now friends, Monty. I was always trying to follow him because I wanted to make a friend. But I was like, I didn't want to get too near because I didn't want to be anxious. And then eventually he came up to me and asked me, like, do you like football? And then I answered yes. And then it was kind of like from there on out we just talked.
44! Mine's 5!
Sorry.
Brilliant!
BBC News Round, and we were particularly pleased with that feature because they also timed to broadcast this at the beginning of school year, which is really kind of relevant. And I often say that kind of media appearances is great for our ego, of course, for CV and things like that. But actually, that is one of the most effective ways to get your message out to the public. Engaging with media and working with journalists, something really, really important, I think, so that mental health can be portrayed in an accurate way, in a useful way for public. I also have it here. It's one of the magazines we've done before with another journalist, and this is come from one of the magazines that is kind of supporting people with mental health difficulties. And this special edition of Project Sue, which is the last project I talk about, for example, was actually co-produced with people in the public as well. So they did a special issue. But also for Resilience Rucksack, we were fortunate enough to have our materials being signposted by BBC Children in Need now. So lots of people think about BBC Children in Need as a sort of shows, but actually they all year round now have their resource page, and ours being signposted there alongside some other things as well, which is all very useful. And some of this really, some of the schools actually approach us after they've seen on TV, or they come across our project through radio interview. So it's really useful because we really get some teachers kind of approaching us and learning about our project. So just now I won't kind of talk about details because in the foyer area you have seen some of the demonstrations already of some of these tools. But I was really, really proud of the young people to have come up with this design themselves, a comic book and a song as well, which you can listen to around sleep, to promote sleep, stress ball. This is the Resilience Rucksack playing cards, compassion journal, and this is actually an animation film you can watch from our website about the transition years. The Friendship Forest, I really like this because when you came in, one of the activities, you can write some of the aspirational or supportive message and hang it in the tree. So what we did is that in school, each school, they produce their own tree and we digitalize them and send it back to them as an archive. But then we merge all the different school friendship trees into a friendship forest just to show them actually you're not alone, we're all in it together, and some of these messages can be shared. So together we want to build a community that is more compassionate. And we work with another charity called Sports in Mind and use some of the resources to promote sports. And towards the end, you have seen some of the demonstration of our rucksack. So you have 3 colors to choose from, but you can further personalize this. The original design is that you can personalize it by having a lot of different things, but turn out that it would be very expensive. You have to produce individual one. But in the end, what we did is that we give them different stickers so they can choose what they want to personalize the sticker. They can also choose one of the key ring of 4 different designs there. And in terms of feedback, we know 93% of the young people say they like it or like it very much. And these are some of the feedback from the teachers. So at the kind of first stage of evaluation, we look at a lot of the feedback, but we also now have our first wave of data coming in. So we've just finished our preliminary data analysis. So I just show you one of the trend, but we'll look at many different variables and many different outcomes. So for this one, we look at the most basic one. The one that we're really most concerned about is the sense of psychological resilience, the mental health and well-being. This is before the fair. So just look at the middle line, that is kind of the average. So it's here, and immediately after the fair, the sense of well-being and mental health gone up. When it's 2 to 4 weeks later, it dropped down a bit. So this is something we want to work on a bit more in the next step of the project, is to think about how to sustain that improvement. However, although it dropped a bit, this is still higher than the baseline. So these are all statistically significant, meaning that they are quite robust changes. So in the next step of the project, we are thinking how best to sustain this. How can we encourage young people to continue using the tool? And that's why we are in discussion with kind of different partner organizations to think about, could we do something there? Make it interesting, maybe some kind of award system maybe, or what can we do to help that? That is the next step of development. So on this note, to conclude, we are facing a mental health crisis. We have been facing that for a while now, actually, and COVID didn't help. It actually escalated the issue. What we need more is that we have a lot of knowledge by research, but we need more of that, because right from the start, I say, only 26% of the research actually focus on young people. We need more research, but not only having the knowledge, we also need more knowledge by practice. So talk to practitioners, work with partnership with them. Also knowledge by experience. That's why we always work with people with lived experience, representatives, and with our sister organization who are very, the Charlie Waller Trust also very, very keen on developing lived experience, working together. And together, we need to work all together. And on this note, I just want to highlight, once again, thank you for the Charlie Waller Trust, but Charlie Waller Institute, which is one of our training institute here, offering a lot of different mental health training programs. Our Andy Clinic, which is anxiety and depression and research in young people research clinic, which is very unique in the country, and our strong partnership with the local NHS Trust, and also our partnership with the NIHR Oxford Health Biomedical Research Centre that supported some of the work that we have done and going forward. And with a bit of indulgence, I want to say a personal thanks to some of the people who have inspired my work, supported me through up and downs of my career. And right from the start, I show you one slide of my 4 decades of my life. And this is so I consider this as a kind of middle point of my life that I'm thinking about what I'm grateful for and what I'm taking forward. And I just want to say thank you to not only these 6 individuals, but also many, many others, including students, research assistants, people who work with me in good times and bad times. I just wanted to say that I couldn't have done it without you. Also, the research participants, their parents and schools. Again, their generosity is deeply felt and will make a lasting impact. So thank you.
Wow, I'm blown away. I think that was amazing. Thank you so much. Another round of applause. So thank you so much, Stella. This was a fascinating lecture. We have time for some questions. So we have about 15-20 minutes, both from the audience here and online. If you are in the audience, we have a microphone. So raise your hand, wait a second for the microphone to come to you, and then start talking. And I know somebody will wave for the questions online when there are any. So I'm sure we have questions or comments, right? The first hand was raised over there, and then the second here. Come back in the middle. Oh. Yeah. I'm not answering the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chan, for a wonderful talk. I'd like, if I may, to ask you to comment on two issues. Neither is specifically on the research that you and your team are doing. They're more contextual matters. Now, at the beginning of your talk, you showed us a number of fascinating slides that pertained to gender differences in levels of anxiety and depression. And so my first request is, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about the observation that clearly in those slides, young girls were experiencing higher levels of anxiety and depression, reported levels of anxiety and depression, and yet, certainly when it comes to the issuance of education and healthcare plans, girls tend to be significantly underrepresented, certainly in this locality. The second request, if I may, is I'd be really interested in any observations that you can share about trends in both the incidence and the complexities of mental health amongst our young people. Thank you.
So can you elaborate on the second question? So is there a particular area you want me to comment on, the second question?
Not specific aspects of mental health, but we hear, for example, reports that COVID has had a very significant impact, particularly on some of the youngest children in our society. And I'm wondering if this is starting to show through in any ways.
Yeah, so first is about gender differences and sex differences. That is something that actually remain not fully explained by scientific evidence. So there were a number of hypotheses around the gender gap. The first, most obvious one is about biological differences, like things like hormone and so. So some of the research, not my own, but some of the research look across lifespan when hormones do change in different stage, especially in women's life. But what it was concluded, a different study, the finding always a bit mixed, but is that despite that change across the lifespan, the gender gap remained the same, is similar. So the gender differences doesn't disappear after teenage time. So that probably means that, there's not a simple thing about, because of puberty or so. It contributes to it, but it doesn't fully explain that of different stages. And another hypothesis, another guess is that people often ask me is, would that be because girls are more likely to kind of be honest about their feelings in questionnaires, or they come forward more often? That is why it show up to be more depression, anxiety. So there's some other research that have been looking at this kind of response biases and use different experimental way to try to understand and investigate that. And certainly there is some contribution to how willing an individual or a gender group is to talk about mental health problem, but that itself also does not fully explain the gap. So so far the consensus is that none of this factor on its own can fully explain the gap. I think there's a couple of things. I can't really kind of give an answer in the sense that no one actually can give an answer for certain. But what I think are the most significant points here is that if you look at kind of before puberty, kind of children, the younger age group, the gap is not that big, but it really starts diverging in the teenage years, coincide with the start of the puberty. And I think there's an increasing acknowledgement around how this kind of biological factors and hormonal changes, how these things actually affect us. Nowadays there's a lot more promotion around that, for example, menopause is a real problem rather than just people getting a bit of moodiness. And similarly for teenage time as well, so recognizing more of that, and that actually prompt more research into that. I think that is definitely something we need to look further into. And in terms of encouraging, young people to talk about that, that is again another thing, because then the more honest people are in, then that give us a more accurate picture, because some of the, it's not only gender differences, cultural differences as well, because one of my PhD student project was to look at how symptoms present differently in different culture, and even depression. My student find that for Asian culture, like Chinese culture, it often kind of presented in something more somatic, like more about like people would complain about their tummy ache or headache, but actually it's related to depression, things like that. So it's not only about that. I think gender differences is one thing, but also important to think about that is the general recognition about looking more into different characteristics and individuals, rather than assuming that it's the same for everyone. So regarding your second question around some observations, there are a couple of things that personally I feel very passionate about. One is to acknowledge that young people, young as they are, they actually are experts of their own life. And in fact, I say that the World Health Organization have advocated we need to have the well-being outcome alongside symptom. Coincidentally, that is what a teenager came and talked to me as a feedback for the participation. So I asked for some feedback of our research, and one of the teenagers came up to me and said, the problem is that I can't tell you I'm feeling great, because all I can say is take no when I don't have these symptoms. So in the end, I know that I probably show up to be no symptom, but there's no way for me to tell you actually I'm feeling great or not, because the symptom doesn't cover their life. So, but what is so amazing is that is a teenager actually give me the same advice as World Health Organization. So that gives me a lot of respect about really, really listening to what young people have to say, and anyone have to say about things, and not be dismissive. That's one thing, is having their voice more to the forefront. And the second thing that I'm very passionate about is that when we do health promotion or mental health, then we shouldn't be too reactive towards a one-off headline or research finding. I was involved in a group led by a wonderful colleague called Sinead at the University of Edinburgh, who I want to give a shout out because she's really inspiring as a person and a colleague. She started this group called teaching young people critical thinking, called kind of rewriting the headline. So the team used to go to school and ask young people to look at the newspaper, that headline, and to consider whether it's a over-sensational one or what is actual fact, and then rewrite the headline to teach them that. And I think the same for mental health. For example, we often see headlines about, social media use, impact on young people, and then everyone panic, maybe we shouldn't use social media. And so these things, I'm not saying it's not true on the headline, but actually that often it come out from one or two study, and then it look, very interesting. And so, but what we really need more when we talk about evidence-based is, that's why I presented some of those data around what we call meta-analysis, which is study that look across many studies. So we need to really bring knowledge together and to spend more time reflecting on that. And when we design intervention, I also think that we need to think about the longer term engagement, because even if you have a magical pill, which we don't have, but even if you find one, if people are not going to take it, it's not going to do anyone any good. So thinking about the engagement as a real issue, and to know that humans are humans, so just be realistic about that, rather than, you can't expect people to do homework or therapy homework for the rest of their life. For a period of time to learn a skill, yes, but long-term maintenance often need a bit more than that, and I think we need to have that. And then the final point, really final one, is about the environment. I think traditionally we give too much pressure to us as an individual. We are human, we're not perfect, we make mistakes, sometimes it's just too much. But a lot of the factors is actually the wider environment, and it's about the system, about how we organize not only support, but about things like stigma and stuff. And I think we sometimes underestimate the impact of that, and leading to a lot of campaign. You know, one direction of the campaign about coming to raise awareness, but raising awareness is only stage one. Once you raise the awareness, people are aware of that, then what do you do about that? So that side need to join up with the more traditional sides of intervention development and merge them together. And that is why my final conclusion just now is about working together. I think that has been quite lacking in the field of mental health.
So we had a question just here, if we bring the mic down. And then we'll have one there, and then we'll check online.
Hello. I live locally, and we have an adult son with a mental disability who has been a patient last year of Berkshire Healthcare. When he was younger, we moved to the States, onto the West Coast. So he experienced a transition from being a child through the 18 into adulthood. What we discovered in the States is they don't have that 18-year cut-off of who is a child. If you have a vulnerability, then legally they've got to look after you until age 26. So one of my questions was, is there research from who or that will give you what happens after the age of 18, which the transition from primary to secondary? But for genders in particular, it's more of a cliff edge at 18. It would be great to see some numbers, such as from the States or elsewhere. Also from ad hoc experience, but comparing it to Berkshire Healthcare, the activation zone in the States seems richer, more innovative than what's happening here. So does the WHO research give you more tools in the toolbox than you've currently got available here? That was an observation. So it would just be nice to know why you've got that mental filter on just looking at childhood, when many of the things you're talking about just continue into adulthood, particularly if you've got disabilities. You don't think of yourself as an adult in our lives, we just continue who they are.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. Actually, I just want to mention some of my clinical colleagues are here. Colleagues with a lot of clinical experience, like Barbara here, I see Jean here, and Hannah here. Feel free to chip in if there's any insight you want to share. But one thing that we do, but I think it probably depends on which region. When I was in clinical training in Cambridgeshire, there, at least at the time, the learning disability service will cover across a wider age range. So it doesn't have a cut-off in 18. So it kind of continue that way. Whereas the mental health actually, stop there. And the problem is that the services, they don't connect. So you got children who struggle and then was seen in the children's services, and they got discharged when they turned 18, right? So even if they got referred to the active service, start all over again almost, and there's no connection there. So when I was in Scotland, there were a lot of talk about, can we change the services to kind of extend the children and young people services, cover until the age of, say, 25 or 26 or something, to cover a transition period. Not saying that after that it's not a transition, because life is a long continuation. It does, but then it may make more sense than 18 is not a good cut-off point, and there have been lots of debate around that. But if you look at the neuroscience literature, that actually really support your view as well, because actually, in terms of the brain development, around 25, 26 is the transitional period in which your brain keep growing, developing until around then, and then it stabilized and sort of started going a little bit downhill. That is a sobering thought as a PhD student when you were at that age. It is true. So if you actually look at science evidence, if you look at everyday observation, and to think about the transitions. The 18 is actually quite arbitrary, and it actually, in many sense, even if the services have to be separated, it needs to work closer together, because a lot of time the record can't even be linked, and so. So I totally agree with you about rethinking about age development, and for intervention, thinking about that transition. I also think about, it's important to think about some of the factors running across the lifespan, but the difference between different age group often is not about the underlying factor. It's more about the context around that. So for example, social relationship. So social relationship difficulty in school perhaps is, in a sense, is the same as social relationship problem in a workplace in terms of the scientific evidence. But if you think about how to support them, could be quite different because the whole organization, institution is different. I always say that because I did struggle a bit as a teenager. But looking back, one of the problems is that if you have relationship problem in your classroom, as a child, you have no sense of control, isn't it? You are in this class, you're stuck there for 7 years or 6 years. You can't really move yourself elsewhere. Whereas in a workplace, it's not ideal to move work or move, to change job, but at least there is some kind of control over that. So the autonomy, for example, would be different. So if you are to support social relationship or bullying issue in school, would be different from an HR department thinking about how to support that at work. So I would say that actually scientifically look widely across with the intervention working with kind of more contextual factors. So, but I totally agree with you in terms of the age range coverage. And also your point about looking across beyond UK and beyond the local region and seek inspiration elsewhere. And I think that is also a very good point to raise.
You mentioned the services. Can I just add a further point? Because within Reading, just walking distance from here, you've got Reading College, Further Education College. They're very good and have a very rich tool set, if you like, for supporting young adults in that transition period. If you go to primary care and the efforts to do social prescribing, that's not so good. And that's very local and very at hand. So from just our lived experience, there's assets you could tap into with what you're already doing in Berkshire Healthcare. Because bullying is a problem throughout life, particularly in employment. I work for NHS England, as it happens. We have a problem with bullying, which is far worse than one might anticipate through the workplace. So we know this problem doesn't go away. We know how it's difficult it is to address. But that's just my personal observation.
Thank you for sharing.
So I knew I said that we would go there, but we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to check if there are any questions online. Who's doing the online questions? Yeah. Okay. I don't want to discriminate for our friends on the live stream. So is there anything pressing on the live stream? Otherwise we can address them, we can bundle them and address them after possibly. We'll take one last question, which is going to be yours over there, and then we'll conclude.
Hi, I work with the younger children, so you mentioned a lot sort of from 10 to 18, and I just wondered if there are any sort of protective and supportive measures that you do with sort of the primary age children, some from 5 to 10, that you'd recommend to help with their resilience before it developed into something bigger?
Yeah, so for Project Soothe, we have trained the nurture assistant, their primary schools. So we had piloted Project Soothe in primary school, quite a lot of primary schools now, and the feedback has been very good. I think partly because photograph is very instant, and if different age group or different circumstances and different culture as well, you can always, they would take different photographs, they would focus on different things, but we found that that's actually a really good way to transcend any kind of barrier. So I would say photograph and pictures tend to work really well. I'll give you an example what they do in primary school. One of them is we work with a charity boys in mind and girls in mind. So they went into the school and they gave a talk about Project Soothe and mental health and so. And they invited the children to identify a photograph that help them calm down or regulate their emotion. They found that photograph, submitted it to the team printed it out and frame it up and give it back to them as a memo. And then they work with a filmmaker with some children, including some more vulnerable children, and to make a short film to showcase some of these photographs. And they have a whole school exhibition to talk about that. So it's about encouraging them to reflect on feelings and talk about that. Another one that we have is on PET as well. One of the schools, no, these are not my idea, actually, it's independent school. So some of the schools find that they have a therapy dog that come in, but the dog can't come in every day because it's shared between schools. They only come in one afternoon a week or something like that. So what the children want is that they find the dog presence very calming. So they make a soothing album with the picture of that dog so that they can use it when the dog is not present. So we work with each school to find out from them what their ideas are, and then we provide some more scientific knowledge, and then we will make suggestions, help them to evaluate the effect. So that was something that I would do that. Another thing I think for younger children that need to come back to a bit basic is to sort of help them understand their feeling and being able to express that. So there have been research both by our group and other teams, is to look into children understanding of emotion, the expression, that kind of thing, and supporting them that way as well, because often I think in the earlier age, then it varies quite a lot, with some children more talkative and more able to express and some are not. And one more remark would be that one of the observations from clinicians is that things like, if people struggle with things like depression, because one of the kind of difficulty with depression is that people tend to lose interest in things that become more withdrawn. But in a classroom setting, that probably means that you'll be quieter. So you're not making any disruption. And if they're doing fine academically, they're often overlooked. So people don't notice that is a problem. Whereas things like, for example, if children having more behavioral side of sort of expression of their feeling, then because it caused more classroom disruption, and at least the teacher noticed them. Although sometimes it's misclassified as behavioral problem, while actually underlying is actually emotional problem. So that is another problem as such, but at least kind of the teachers noticed them. So actually thinking through this and actually thinking more widely in terms of our gender norms and stereotypes, that sort of things as well sometimes make a difference to coming back to the first question about gender. I think there's something to do with that as well. So I would say kind of going back is in a classroom setting, sometimes it's really difficult for one teacher to really observe 30 children, but kind of pay attention to the quiet ones just in case.
Thank you. I'm sure we could stay here all night and truly enjoy a conversation with Stella, but unfortunately it's my duty to close right now the session. So thank you again. Please let's join me again in thanking Professor Chan. This has been a fascinating lecture. If you've enjoyed tonight's lecture and you'd like to learn more and on how to get involved, please speak to Stella, who's going to stick around for a little bit and be able to have a more one-to-one conversation should you want, and other members of the team who are also in the audience or will be outside later on. We truly hope to see you at future events, and you can find out about our events online at the link that you can see just here. So thank you again for attending. It's always a pleasure to host these events and to learn so much. And I hope to see you again later on. In the meantime, have a lovely evening. Thank you. Thank you.